today, you will be ejected from the ground, you will be banned from going to watch your favourite football team for as long as you live. So people brought laws in to protect those players so they didn't have to go out onto the ground and have bananas thrown at them.
Well, there's a difference between assault and speech, and to have things thrown at you is a form of assault. No, look, I don't want to have an argument about whether or not there is such a thing as hate speech or whether or not it's bad. My point was very straightforward. There's tremendous danger in allowing people to define hate, because who defines it? And you say, well, it's the intended victims. It's like, yes, that sometimes works, but there's lots of pitfalls in that because it doesn't take intent into account.
One of the 12 rules for life that you've put forward here is don't let your kids do anything that makes you dislike them. That is a hard one. That's a pretty hard one to follow, I would imagine. For most parents would be thinking, well, if only. How do you do that? How do you do that in practice?
That's an interesting response, because lots of people would say, well, I can't ever imagine disliking my kids. And I think that's an absolutely preposterous response, because anyone with any sense knows that children can do things that instigate feelings of dislike in you. Well, the point in that chapter is relatively straightforward, which is that you should act like a proxy of the environment for your children, because your goal as a parent for children between the ages of 0 and 4 particularly is to help your children regulate their behavior so that the natural inclination that other people have to love and admire children isn't destroyed by their misbehavior. Because what you want for your kids, obviously, is, if you're thinking about it, is you want your kids to be extremely desirable as a play partner for other kids. So they have to know how to regulate their behavior enough so that they can play fair. And also so that they can attend to adults in a proper and let's say, respectful manner so that the adults are willing to interact with them. And then you have children under your care, and wherever you take them, everyone is thrilled to see them, and the doors of the world open to them. And that's really your goal as a parent. And you can reach that goal in part by noticing when your children are doing things that disturb you. Because if they disturb you, the probability that they're going to disturb other people, assuming that you're a reasonable person, you might want to discuss that with your partner. If they disturb you, well, because, people can make mistakes. But if your children's behavior disturbs you and makes you want to take revenge on your children, then it's definitely going to disturb other people, and their revenge is going to be a lot harsher. It's just not fun to go to a restaurant or a public place and see. It's not fun for me to see a little 3-year-old kid who's cute as can be running about, causing all sorts of trouble, non-helpful trouble, and getting frowned at and getting looked at badly, when a little bit of discipline properly applied would have stopped that from happening in the first place. It's not good for the child, and really it's hurtful to not help your children understand how to behave in public.
So all of your children did exactly what they were told all their lives when you tried to discipline them?
No, and I told them explicitly not to do what people told them. One of our rules in our house was don't follow stupid rules. I encouraged my children to be as autonomous as they possibly could.
So how did you instill discipline in them at a very young age?
It depends on how young. When
you're talking about 3-year-olds.
Yeah, well, we could go younger than that. When my son was about 9 months old, that was about when he was crawling around. The first thing I did was taught him what no meant, and I'd watch him crawl around, and then he'd go and head for the house plant or something like that, or maybe try to topple some books on his head, and I would just grab his leg and hold him and say, no, you can't do that, no. And I'd hold him long enough so he'd stop, and he'd usually cry a little bit then, because children don't like being interfered with. And then as soon as he stopped, I'd let him go, and he'd go explore again, and then he'd do something that would get him in trouble, and I'd stop him again. And after about 3 days of that, careful attention, all I had to do was say no, and he would cry and stop. And then about a week later, all I had to do was say no, and he wouldn't cry anymore. He would just stop. And then he had maximal freedom in the house, because I had taught him what he could investigate and what he couldn't. And I taught him to regulate his behavior verbally, and then I could just let him go. And I just kind of keep half an eye on him. And if he was ever getting in trouble, I'd just say no, and he'd move off to something else. But like the chapter describes very carefully, that in your household, you should have a minimum number of rules. Like, excessive rules are a very bad idea, but the rules that you do have, you should enforce intelligently and effectively. And then you get the optimal balance between order and chaos in your household.
You're listening to Jordan B. Peterson. The book is called 12 Rules for Life. We're having with us for the next